Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Oh yeah, just sipping some Kool-Aid. It's a technique called method reporting. I'm trying to get into the minds of those in today's headlines. You see, 9 out of 10 cult members prefer to drink Kool-Aid before partaking in a mass suicide or when attempting to assassinate a public figure. You don't hear much these days about cult leaders and their crazy followers, but we've got some in our headlines. Stacey Herbert, tell us more.
Yes, Max. They used to make the news more often, but I think now it's just part of the fabric of our society that we're all cult members. And if you look at this first headline, this is an editorial from the Financial Times by Adam Posen, a former member of Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England. The cult of home ownership is dangerous and damaging. So in the US and the UK, we have home ownership rates of 65 to 70%. And we're told over and over that we need to have more and more, greater percentage of ownership because 70% isn't enough. We need 100%. And this will grow the economy. But if you look at economies, he points out, like Japan, Germany, and France, their home ownership rates are only 30 to 40%. And yet we can all agree that these economies are strong and the populations have high incomes. So he says, start with the distortion to savings behavior that mortgage subsidies and high loan-to-value ratios encourage. For many American and British households, their home equity is their primary financial asset. In other words, we incentivize middle-class households to leverage the bulk of their savings into a highly volatile, difficult-to-price asset, which is subject to disaster risk, both idiosyncratic, fire, tree falling on the roof, and general, flood, local industry closure, and which, based on the economic fundamentals, should return at best the average rate of local wage and population growth.
Yeah, well, I like the Jim Jones Guyana cult. I think they was the first and really the best example of drinking the Kool-Aid. And Jim Jones could easily be the new Federal Reserve Chairman. You know, they're considering John Yellen or Larry Summers. They need a Jim Jones-like character to step in there, put on those sunglasses, pass out the Kool-Aid, and get everyone to just speculate crazily in the real estate market more than they are already. We know that a crash is baked into the Kool-Aid-ridden cake. We know that there'll be a huge wipeout in equity. For example, in America, there was, thanks to the last real estate crash, an evisceration of wealth across the land. The bankers have made out great, and the speculators did okay. But the average person got wiped out. Not as badly as they're about to get wiped out in the UK, in America, thanks to this next Kool-Aid-driven cult-like housing bubble.
Well, first of all, can you pour me a little bit of that while I get to the next bit? Because I need to really understand this Kool-Aid drinking housing bubble mentality. So he looks at the fact that the propaganda all over the UK, all over the US, is about you have to get on the property ladder. This is a great middle-class way to build equity in homes, become a wealthy, rentier sort of class person. Average individuals, however, cannot calculate, let alone reasonably project, the running costs and financial risks of their housing investment as opposed to renting and putting their savings in more stable, liquid assets. But they constantly hear the misleading mantra that renting is throwing money away while incurring mortgage debt builds equity.
Well, there are wider economic ramifications. To support this real estate cult, it means keeping interest rates artificially low, which means that the UK economy, for example, has pushed away any attempt at creating a manufacturing base, because a manufacturing base would require capital investment. But all that capital is being used as a massive George Osborne Ponzi scheme. So there won't be any high-paying manufacturing jobs in this economy. There's only bubble.
Well, this is exactly what Adam Posen points out here, is that all of the middle-class savings is going into housing instead of putting it to more productive uses, such as investing in new businesses, infrastructure, or research and development. And so, ironically, all the research shows that, in fact, the more housing ownership you have in a community, a state, or a municipality, always following the house price rises and the home ownership increase, you find unemployment also increase?
Right, well, because economics is a wonderful science that can bring some simple mathematics to the day-to-day activities of one's household and one's economy. And if you dump all of your money into speculating and you crowd out the actual manufacturing jobs that would create labor, and create wages, and create capital that would form the basis of capitalism, the results are predictable. You see it in this economy. Wages are growing at less than 1%. Housing bubble is growing at a considerably rate higher, and the average house price is now at a record high multiple to wages. That will only increase because Osborne has redirected the flow of cash in this economy so that it only goes towards speculation in housing.
And because there are so many middle class, the voter, the typical voter, is hugely leveraged to increases in house prices. He points out that the mass movement of voters' savings into an inherently risky asset also creates demands on policymakers to provide capital gains on housing that their constituents otherwise would not receive.
Right, so it completely transforms the political landscape. So the economy is mismanaged by Osborne, and it bleeds into mismanagement of the general economy, the general policies of the country at large. It fosters all kinds of corrupt foreign policies and domestic policies. Everything is just like a Jim Jones in Guyana. They all gather together, they all drink the Kool-Aid, and they're all, it's on suicide watch. There's 60 million people in Britain are being given the Kool-Aid of a real estate bubble, and they're all going to suffer a massive crash, which Darwin, one of the famous citizens of the UK, might say, that's great because we're getting rid of the overpopulation of druids. Okay, that would be Darwin's opinion. But for others, they might say it might not be a great way to run an economy.
So because all these voters are so leveraged, they also, as a result, we get a combination of regulatory measures, local stimulus plans, subsidies to property lending, and bias towards inflation that promote housing bubbles. So, of course, this is obviously what we see in the UK and the US. The economies are recovering because of the housing bubble now being re-engineered. In the US, I was just reading that house prices are up 12.5% in the last year.
Right, well, let's put this in context. Any number you put on the house price appreciation, there is another number that's greater, and that is the increase in debt. The GDP in the UK was just reported at 0.6%. The amount of debt was triple that, the growth in debt. The amount of wages, however, is completely stagnant. The amount of debt in the UK is now projected to double to over £4 trillion in debt over the next 3 years. So, yes, you can create an illusion of wealth by pumping a Ponzi scheme, as Osborne is doing, at the expense of taking the Bank of England's balance sheet and making it into a £4 to £5 trillion debt black hole.
Well, so then he's saying here that this alters government policy. And Bloomberg provides a headline showing exactly that. American Dream Erased as home ownership at 18-year low. With ownership at 65% and home values rising, housing industry and consumer groups are pressing lawmakers to make the American dream more inclusive by ensuring new mortgage standards designed to prevent another crash are flexible enough that more families can benefit from the recovery. Regulators are close to proposing a softened version of a rule requiring banks to keep a stake in risky mortgages they securitize.
Well, this is the joke, is that you've got someone like Senator Elizabeth Warren who wants to bring in Glass-Steagall, reintroduce Glass-Steagall, going back to the reforms of FDR after the last crash, or the biggest crash of '29. Meanwhile, on Wall Street, they're working to reduce the requirements for capital on their balance sheets. They're looking to increase their loan to reserve ratios. They're constantly nibbling on the edges to completely transform the system so that there's more speculation, less equity. And then Elizabeth Warren has trotted out saying, well, we're going to bring back Glass-Steagall maybe. That's never going to happen. And even if it does, it'll have been mitigated into total ineffectiveness by all these other myriad of policies engineered by bankers for bankers at the expense expense of everyone else.
Well, it's even more than that because this is the fraud. These are the collateralized debt obligations. What they're saying is they should be able to package those more because right now they can't. They can't push fraud onto the pension schemes, and therefore they're going to Congress and they're using those American dream, you, the middle class family, you want your house price to go up 12%. We can make it happen by pushing fraud on the other end into your pension scheme. But they also point out here, I want to say that it's down at an 18-year low where it's now 65% of U.S. Population is homeowners or mortgage holders anyway. The peak was at 69% in 2004. So they want to get it above 65%. They say it's going to bottom at 64%. This is important to put into the context of needing an economy and manufacturing and wealth creation. Because the average for 30 years before 1995 in the US was 64%. That was the average for the percentage of the population that owned a home. Well, 1994 is when NAFTA came in. So post-NAFTA, we don't have jobs. We don't have manufacturing. All our real wealth-creating jobs were sent overseas. So all we have left is this one-trick pony, this constant housing bubbles that wipe out banking systems, wipe out economies, and savings.
Right, so the banks want the rule change so they can resell mortgages again than they've already resold, the mortgage and the mortgage derivatives, the collateralized debt obligations. They want to resell the same mortgage over and over and over again. So somebody takes out a mortgage on a house. The bank then resells that into what's called the wholesale market. They want the ability then to take that mortgage and resell it again, and resell it a third, and resell it a fourth time. Here in the UK, that's called rehypothecation. There's no law against selling it an infinite number of times in the UK. America wants that law changed in that way so they can infinitely rehypothecate the same mortgage. I have a suggestion. You take a banker like Jamie Dimon, who's got mortgages that he's rehypothecated or resold dozens of times. I think wherever he's living up there on the Upper East Side, let 6 or 7 dozen families move in with Jamie to represent the number of times he's resold that mortgage. So I think Jamie should have 60 or 70 people living in his living room. Those are the people that he's profited from reselling that mortgage 60 times. So why aren't those 60 people then living with Jamie, living with Lloyd Blankfein, living with Warren Buffett? Why are they living in houses that don't have 60 or 70 or 80 people living there? The number of times they've resold that mortgage and profited each and every time and put the system at complete risk. And of course, when it crashes, as of course it will, they'll get a bailout.
Well, let's talk about this because we're talking about economic suicide. We're talking about political, societal suicide because it's important to address this. This is the final headline here regarding this Kool-Aid policy, the drinking the Kool-Aid. It's just not Jamie Dimon. It's not just Warren Buffett. That's the important thing. Those are cult leaders. The population are the people drinking the Kool-Aid. They're the ones that want to drink it. They're drinking it. The final headline, the cult of home ownership promotes disastrous politics. So this is Matt Iglesias, and he looks at the fact that a house is actually very similar to a car. It's both a consumer durable and it needs gasoline, a commodity, to run. But even though both automobiles and tanks of gasoline are widely owned in the United States, politicians don't run around trying to promote expensive cars and gasoline because we rightly recognize that this would reduce living standards, not raise them. So the equivalent is because so many Americans, because of the housing bust, because of the banking collapse, now live in their cars, the equivalent would be for Barack Obama, the Congress, the Republican Party, everybody, and all the participants, all the formerly middle class now living in cars, seeking policies that would restrict the supply of cars so that their cars, while they're living in a car park, will increase in value so that they can then flip it to another person and become wealthy.
Makes sense to me. All right, Stacey Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Stay tuned for the second half, a whole lot more. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Dominic Frisby. Dominic, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Max. Lovely to be here.
I want to just point out that you are the resident gold bug at Money Week,
That's
a
right.
fine publication here in the UK. You're also the author of the crowd-funded Life After the State.
Yes, absolutely right, and it's coming out in about a month's time.
Oh, fantastic. All right, Dominic Frisby, let's talk about the UK economy. GDP is up. Is it up for the wrong reasons, however, as some are suggesting, like just tied to housing? Your thoughts?
Well, the housing market is enjoying a rally, and our economy is too dependent on housing and finance. This recovery is fueled by debt and money printing and so on and so forth. The bottom line is we don't make enough stuff. I think something like 10% of our industry, 10% of our GDP is manufacturing. Once upon a time, it was over 50%.
Right. So prior to the 2007 and 2008 crash, the UK economy was over-reliant on finance and housing. So after the crash, George Osborne decided to reinflate the housing and finance bubble.
I think that's about right, yeah.
So the GDP numbers reflect a new bubble.
I would say so, and but when it pops is the big question. If it will ever pop, who knows?
Okay, so we're saying 10% or less of the economy is actually export-driven.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's all speculative excess, again, driven by a Ponzi scheme. George Osborne's Help to Buy scheme, which is a part of his housing scheme. Everyone from the Keiser report here to Mervyn King to the IMF has called Mervyn King's scheme a Ponzi scheme. Now, the participants in the scheme love it. But your thoughts?
Well, I've yet to find somebody speak positively about it. It is met with only criticism, but I think I know what's behind it, because early in this government's term, I had quite a few meetings with policymakers, and people were there was this meme doing the rounds that what made Thatcher popular wasn't all the things that we read about. It was the fact there was a thing called right to buy, and it gave people who lived in council houses, in social housing, the right to buy their flats. And suddenly, this created a new kind of demographic, if you like, of homeowners. And it was this that made Thatcher popular amongst certain quarters of the working classes, and it was that made the Tories so popular. And what made the Tories unpopular and unelectable for maybe half a generation wasn't Tony Blair and what a wonderful guy he was. It was the fact that so many people lost their homes in the real estate crash of the late 80s, early 90s because of spiralling interest rates. People couldn't make their payments and homes were repossessed. So the Tories have got this idea that, one, we cannot let people lose their homes under our watch, which is one of the reasons you're seeing such suppressed interest rates. And two, they're trying to find a magic bullet, a bit like what right to buy was, and that's, I think, what's behind this Help to Buy. They're trying to turn people into homeowners. Another interesting factet for you is the fact that people who own their homes are more likely to vote than people who don't. So it's an entirely politically motivated policy, and it's not because they're so desperate to house people. If they were desperate to house people, they'd change all the crazy regulations about the housing market in this country. It's simply a vote-winning exercise, in my opinion.
Okay, so let's talk about the other side of these policies that are engineered to create a housing bubble, to create favorable voting conditions, low interest rates you mentioned already. But when you artificially come in and you supersede the market and you artificially press interest rates down using quantitative easing, for example, to boost your votes, as the Tories are obviously doing and trying to resurrect the ghost of Maggie Thatcher.
They're trying to engineer a boom in time for the next election.
But it causes some shortcomings in other areas of the economy. For example, savers, people who have money in the bank, who have saved, who have worked all their lives, instead of getting 5% interest on their savings as they would normally, they're getting 1% or 1.5%, right?
Absolutely. It creates a culture of spending and speculation rather than saving and investment.
So capitalism, and you're a capitalist.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But I'm, in the true sense of the word, I'm not a, whatever this is, I'm not a crony capitalist.
Fair enough. So capitalism relies on capital.
Absolutely.
Capital comes from savings.
Absolutely.
And savings comes from working.
Absolutely, and spending less than you earn.
So here you have an economy in the UK that's not capitalist in that sense. So when people say, for example, these protest groups, like, I mean, there are some in the UK Uncut, or even the green groups or things, they always attack capitalism.
Yeah.
But they're really attacking the wrong target, because capitalism... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
It's absolutely fine. This is an issue I feel very strongly about, actually. It's one of the things that motivated my book, and I talk about it at great length. This huge kind of movement of anger, the Occupy movement and everything else, I'm entirely in agreement with the motivation behind it, but the target is wrong. They think capitalism is bad. They think capitalism creates inequality. It doesn't. It's actually the most equal and fair system. But what they're railing against has somehow got the name capitalism. It isn't. It's, like I said, crony capitalism.
So I've made the statement or posited that minimum wage is for labor what interest rates are for speculators. In other words, if you or the bank is keeping rates down to artificially low rates, a 1%, 0.5% here in the UK, to favor speculators, as you're pointing out. It's anti-capitalist, it's pro-speculating, it's creating bubbles, and it's creating economic duress. On the other side of the equation, you're saying less than 10% of the economy's export. Well, by increasing that export, you're talking about increasing jobs. You're talking about increasing manufacturing, which would mean you'd have to pay people something that's commensurate with the skill that they are giving into the economy to manufacture stuff to export. So that organized labor factor, you know, the trade union Congress and these people that have been disenfranchised, these union people, that has to represent itself, but not the way that they've been representing themselves up until now. Is there a room, if you were advising TUC, which is an unlikely scenario, but if you were, would you say to them, look, don't argue that you want necessarily fairer wages. You want wages that are tied to the free money that the Bank of England is giving. Why can't the Bank of England go £3 trillion into debt to finance wages to create exports? Why are they only going into debt to finance speculation to create bubbles?
Well, that's a very good point. It would be, I think that's one of the criticisms of quantitative easing and artificially low interest rates and all the rest of it, is that the money hasn't made its way into the real economy.
Okay. I want to stick on housing. Adam Posen, who writing in the Financial Times, he said, quote, "The cult of housing is an economically disastrous one, and we've scammed the middle class into placing highly leveraged bets on a volatile asset on the premise of building equity." Okay, so we've come around back to housing, and it's a bubble, and Adam Posen in the FT, I mean, you can't argue with his sentiments.
No, I couldn't agree more. We're just so reliant on housing, and it's absolutely crazy. And the housing market in this country is insane. Let me just give you a couple of stats. There's a very good book by a gentleman called Kevin Cahill called Who Owns Britain and Ireland? And did you know, for example, that less than 8% of this country is built on? In other words, the entire population of this country live on less than 8% of the land. 70% of British land is owned by less than 1% of the population. The Crown, large institutions, aristocratic families. Almost 50% of the land in Britain is entirely unregistered. And there are 60 million acres of land in the UK. There are roughly 60 million Britons. We could have an acre of land each, but the average Briton lives on 340 square yards. 60 million people live in 24 million homes, which occupy just 7.7% of the land, 4.4 million acres. And the average density of people on one residential acre of British land is 12 to 13. So it all works out as about 0.07 acres per person. It's such a distorted it's such a distorted way of distributing the wealth. It's just incredible. This 1% own 70%.
Well, the cult of housing, people want to get in on that. In other words, Thatcher opened the floodgates and said, you too can be a homeowner, you can do a house owner. They want to get into it. They emulate the royal family. They emulate the monarchy. The royal baby popped out of the womb, and suddenly, you know, the whole world is, we want to be monarchs and aristos too. So that feeds in. And BBC is a state institution. They support this idea of the cult of housing.
It's crazy. And I mean, we have the expression, an Englishman's home is his castle. And there is this obsession with owning land. It's natural to want to own land. Everyone wants to do it. It's the, it's an obvious form of wealth.
But in exchange for the 0% interest rates that allow people to get on this so-called ladder is in exchange for other policies that are highly detrimental. Foreign policies that are detrimental. Domestic work policies that are detrimental. So people are trading their civil rights. All these CCTV cameras in Britain. This is the most surveyed country in the world. You just mentioned land per citizen. How many CCTV cameras per citizen? It's something like
I think we have more in London than anywhere else in the world, don't we?
For every 10, there's at least 1 or 2 cameras, and it's growing exponentially. So they give that up in exchange for low rates and a housing bubble that's always, always, without fail, crashes.
Well, one of the biggest, most economic crashes, the crash of 2008 was driven by a real estate bubble. It's real estate bubbles create more problems than they cure. The other problem we have is planning restrictions. Nobody can build anything in this country. Well, I mean, they can, it's not that simple, but it's just so onerous to try and buy land and get planning permission, despite the fact that most land isn't built on. Again, it means that everyone's trying to buy this tiny pool of land. You know, there's a tiny pool of houses, and everyone's trying to buy those houses rather than, you know, the market being freed up. Actually, what we need is a land tax. I'll give you another
A land tax? That doesn't sound very Tory-friendly.
Well, I don't know. We need a land tax so that unused land passes to people who are not using it to people who will use it. And it would make for a much more fair and efficient distribution of wealth.
All right, well, we can talk about that next time. Dominic
Okay.
Frisby, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
My pleasure, Max. Thank you very much.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Dominic Frisby, author of the crowd-funded Life After the State. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can do so on Twitter. Tweet Keiser Report. Until next time, Max Keiser saying, bye, y'all.